Okay, thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, everybody. As Richard has said, I'm with HomeBond Building Control. We are a separate company that was set up as a direct implication of the Building Control Amendment regulations. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about just HomeBond, just to set the context of what we do on a weekly basis. Talk about the BCMS, the system data requirements, design check and compliance with building regulations. Just a little bit in relation to the correspondences, the automated correspondences that we get from the BCMS. We'll talk about the inspection plans, the Annex of Documents, the Commencement notice drawings, and then fundamentally we'll go through a list of our learnings. We're 10 years putting in commencement notices through the BCMS system. So at this stage we have a good dossier of our learnings and our findings. So hopefully we've learned from them in the past, and we'll try and share them with everybody today as such. So HomeBond Building Control Ltd was set up in 2014, again a direct consequence of the Building Control Amendment regulations. We provide a national building control services. We do Assigned Certifier roles, but we can do Design Certifier roles. So typically what we like to do, we like to act as the Assigned Certifier, and the project architect will do the Design Certifier. That would be the most common scenario on our sites as such. So fundamentally, we don't provide Assigned Certifier or building control services in isolation. We provide other services for commercial reasons and really to marry in with our latent defect policy that we have. So typically we'll do deep calculations. We have our latent defects insurance policy. And just, I suppose, that policy, I joined HomeBond 20 years ago. When I started first, that was a warranty as such. It changed to an insurance policy. And then in 2014, it changed to a latent defects insurance policy. So specifically brought in relation to the Building Control Amendment regulations, where it gives you cover in relation to particular building regulations, A, B, C, D, for example, G and H as well, just to cover off the risk. We've established, I think, fairly clearly as part of the course of the day that the Assigned Certifier is carrying a lot of liability in relation to the sign-off process between the building owner, the builder, and the Assigned Certifier and the Design Certifier, the four statutory parties to the Building Control Amendment regulations. So for me to act as an Assigned Certifier with HomeBond, I have the backup of knowing that all the houses that I'm signing off is covered by our latent defects insurance policy. So we all know about PI insurance. It's been brought up in the discussions here today. I have an extra layer of cover by virtue of the fact that anything that I am signing off has a latent defects insurance policy. And that's one of my requirements to act as an Assigned Certifier. You can just see on the slide there the discussions of the registration. So I'm a registered building surveyor, and that's just a copy of my cert for this year. So under the Building Control Act, I am a registered building surveyor, which I need to be to sign off with the building regulations as such. So we have our latent defects insurance policy, and acting as the Assigned Certifier actually fitted in very well with that role that we done. Historically, we reviewed designs of houses, we inspected them and certified them. So our feeling was it was a natural progression for us to do Assigned Certifier. Obviously the risks are increased, the inspection regimes are increased, and the diligence, the documentation and the administration. So during the course of the day, we've been talking about the administration process through the BCMS process system. You have to remember, as Assigned Certifiers, we have other administrative functions to carry out on a contractual basis. So typically on our developments, we will be signing off interim certificates for compliance with the building regulations. Most projects now have funders, and those funders have particular requirements. So interim certs have to be signed. Most projects require collateral warranties, letters of engagements, etc. So all that is a separate administrative process. Again, when it comes to conveying of the house, we have to provide the copies of the CCC, and in some cases we will have to provide certified copies of the CCC. So there's quite a degree of administration from a contractual point of view for Assigned Certifiers as well, over and above what we've looked at today through the BCMS system. Other services that we do in HomeBond, we do design services for deep calculations. We do final BERs, air tightness, ventilation validation check, which is an important thing. And again, the building control authorities are enforcing it stringently at the moment. Training and technical support, we run our own courses in relation to building regulations, and all that information is available on our website. So just the last thing on this side, just to give you some context in relation to what we do from a building control point of view. So in 2022, we had 49 commencement notices, which equated to 1,156 dwellings as such. So that's on average 23 units per commencement notice. So we've seen a clear trend this year where we're putting in the same number of commencement notices, but the total number of units has dropped down for a number of different reasons. We have large apartment schemes that have fallen off the radar due to maybe funding and reasons like that. And then a lot of our housing schemes were putting in smaller numbers of units as part of the commencement notice as well. So again, some changes in our statistics year on year as such. So in 22, we would have submitted 311 certificates in compliance on completion, and that equated to 1,200 units. So that's a huge amount of interaction with the BCMS. And we'll talk later on. I just give you some of the statistics in relation to the automated emails we get through the system as well. So that just gives you an outline of what HomeBond Building Control are doing and the numbers of commencement notices we are submitting as such. For us to submit a commencement notice, we have to have very basic information. So we submit a form to our client or the building owner, and we get all this information. And it's basic, it's email addresses, it's planning reference numbers, it's dates, it's details on the design certifier and the builder. And the information that we are given in this form fundamentally is what we use to set up the file on the BCMS system. And this information that we are given, we have seen over the years that we have to check the information that we get. You know, we talk about a lot of the interactions we have with the Building Control Authority in relation to commencement notices. A lot of it stems out of this basic information that we get from the client. So we have learned to get the information and to check the value of it and make sure everything is correct. And we'll talk about email addresses and planning dates and all that type of information afterwards. But that's where we start with our commencement notice submission as such. The next thing, it's fundamental to the whole process. Richard and all the other presenters this morning talked about compliance with the building regulations. And fundamentally, as an assigned certifier, we have to show the Building Control Authority how our project complies with the building regulations. So the very first thing we do on a project, we've taken the list of building regulations out of the back of the code of practice, and we've broken it down into each separate building regulation. So that's just in relation to that slide there, and that's available in the code of practice. Just be careful, that code of practice is dated 2016. There's been changes in building regulations, for example, under Part B, example, Part L's, Part C's. There's a new one coming under Volume 1 in Part B. So if you use the one from the code of practice, you'll have to update it yourself and add in the extra building regulations as such. So what we do is we look at the building regulations. Does that regulation apply to our particular project that we're submitting the commencement notice for? So not every building regulation will apply to a project. For example, in relation to drainage, possibly wouldn't apply because most of our projects would be connected to the main sewer systems as well. There's other areas, for example, you have 2 Part B's regulations. If it's a house, it's only Volume 2 that applies as such. So identify what building regulations apply to your project. The next area that we identify who is doing the design work for that. So if it's to do with fire, is it the architect? Is it the fire consultant? Is the M&E guy? You know, you will have multiple designers for each building regulations in most situations. A structure is normally straightforward enough. It's the consultant engineer. If it's a system like timber frame, we will have a structural design. And any of those structural designs, simple, straightforward, showing a Eurocode design with the relevant, if it's 5 or 6 timber frame or masonry as such. So that's the second part of it. Who is the designer? And then we developed that further in relation to showing compliance, and we'll go into that in a few moments. Since we started building control back in 2014, we started our own building control risk assessment. And when it started first, the first thing that was on the top of the list was to provide a set of designed construction drawings showing compliance with A to M. That was the very first thing back in 2014 that we identified that we needed. And again, it's still topical. It's been mentioned regularly today as well. We've developed that list on further, and we look at different things. So our big focus at the minute is modern methods of construction and different situations, you know, compliance with building regulations, requirements to have agreement certs, exposure, fire issues, 3-story houses, protected corridors. So everything we identify, we put it on our risk assessment, and we use that knowledge and information on our next project, so just to ensure that we're achieving compliance. So that's our risk guide, and fundamentally as Assigned Certifier, that risk guide is very important. You have to do your desktop assessment. Is it exposed? What part of the country is it in? All these things have to be taken into consideration, because until you do that, you cannot do your inspection notification framework. You have to decide what type of construction it is, and that will dictate how many inspections. We'll come back to the inspections later on. Just a little slide, examples wise. If I submit a commencement notice to the BCMS and I'm acting as the Assigned Certifier and the Design Certifier, I will get 7 emails in relation to accepting the roles. I'll get another 4 for receipt of payment, another 2 when the project is valid as such. So I'll have 13 emails, minimum of 13 emails in relation to the submission of a commencement notice. And it's just where I'm the Assigned Certifier on a number of projects at any one time, during the course of the day between commencement notices and CCCs, I could have to go to 20 emails from the BCMS system. So my own opinion is there's a little bit of duplication there. For example, when you're doing Assigned Certifier and Design Certifier, you're actually getting the same email twice. And it's not just the fact that these emails are coming into your inbox and you have to look at them and make sure that everything is validated and everything has gone to plan. You fundamentally have to take that and you have to put it up into a portal system or save it to a folder where you can retain it and keep it for as long as you need to, under the statutory and your contractual requirements as well. A lot of the emails you're getting, you know, valid confirmation that the commencement notice is valid, they have to be distributed to the client and to the design team and to the builder. So again, there's an administrative function there outside of the BCMS as such. So the inspection plan has been mentioned a few times today as such. So as I said, it's risk-based. You have your Code of Practice 2016, which is a good document. In the back of that, it gives an inspection plan, a sample inspection plan for a simple building as such. So fundamentally in that, there's a minimum of 6 inspections, and we developed that further. We have a software system that we carry out inspections. When we put in a commencement notice for a new project, we have our inspection software, we generate the project, we generate each separate housing unit in that project, and under that, each separate house on the system, we will have an inspection plan, and we will record an inspection. Typically for a straightforward 2-story house, it'll be 6 inspections. It'll be the foundations, the floor, the rising walls, the intermediate floor will be all one, the roof construction, first fix, and then the final or practical completion inspection. And there's good guidance given in the framework, and that'll basically tell you what you need to check and what you're signing off compliance for at each stage. So that software that we have, we record our inspections, and that does up a record of our inspection plan. We take that information then at CCC stage, and you're going to go through that a little bit further on. So fundamentally, at the start of the project, we're telling the Building Control Authority how we're going to inspect our houses, risk-based analysis to show compliance with the building regulations. And then at the end of the process, I'm going to update my inspection plan. I'm going to say when I inspected each housing unit, and I'm going to confirm what I looked at. At foundations, was it designed? Was the strips, was it clean, dry, was it the correct width, etc. So again, there's just a visual confirmation that that information was looked at. So the inspection plan is important, and I feel it's important for the Building Control Authority as well to show how you're complying with the building regulations. Annex of documents. This has been discussed on a number of occasions this morning. From the point of view of the Assigned Certifier, again, we're showing the Building Control Authority how this project complies with the building regulations. Ideally, I'd love to be able to give every document when I'm submitting the commencement notice to show how that complies. I don't think that's practical in a lot of situations. We always have design that changes along the way, and we even had it referenced earlier, and it's quite common now where we have construction types change. So you might have put in a commencement notice for timber frame. Along the way, because of logistics, etc., it may change to ICF. As John said, you have to update then before CCC stage. So that is quite common for an assigned certifier to have to change your inspection plan and upload a completely new list or schedule of documents in relation to design. So Richard went through the list of the requirements, so I'm not going to go through it again. It's your deep calculations, it's your design. Fundamentally, you're uploading a document to show how you comply with the building regulations. So how do you show compliance with Part A structure? You have to upload your Eurocode design in relation to that. In relation to fire, you know, you're going your B1s, your B5s, or your B1 to B12, whatever it is now in the future, you're going to have to show compliance. So drawings, Richard went through a scenario where you show all that information on the drawings. I like an approach where you would do an A to M compliance report for the project. So say, for example, it'd be a high-level narrative document which would say how you comply with the different parts of the building regulations. So A, I'm doing a Eurocode design if it's timber frame or masonry. B, I'm going to show compliance with the different parts. Means of escape, I'm going to provide an escape window to a bedroom. It's going to be 0.33 of a meter squared. It's going to be minimum 450 millimeters, etc. So a compliance document can be useful as a standalone document to show how this particular project complies with the building regulations. Now, this is what I would like. That would be my preferred approach, to put that as part of my commencement notice submission. Again, it's typically the design certifier that would need to compile that as such. So again, I don't always have it in a lot of situations. If I don't have my A to M compliance report, I'm back to what Richard discussed earlier, where I have my drawings and my separate indications of compliance with the different parts of the building regulations as such. So the annexing document is important. It's showing the Building Control Authority what you have designed, what you need to design, and it's useful as well from the point of view of the assigned certifier and the design team, because fundamentally we as assigned certifiers, design certifiers, we are ensuring every element is designed. So again, we've mentioned earlier, we're going to assign design duties to each party, and this is a good cross-references to schedule to make sure that all elements have been designed. And as we've heard earlier, buildings are getting very complicated, you know, in relation to fire, Part L and all the rest. So you will have multiple designers for each discipline as such. Just at this point, it might be good to mention PI insurance. I'm an assigned certifier. I have to have PI insurance for government contracts, and again for funders, etc. That could be a 6.5 million cover. I have ancillary designers working underneath me, which is your architect, your engineers, your fire consultants. It's important from my point of view that those guys have proper PI insurance as well. And that's something that all assigned certifiers need to check. Has everybody part of the design team, have they got adequate insurances? And again, we're all familiar with what's happening in the realms of PI insurance at the minute, where some designers are finding it difficult to achieve PI insurance in relation to fire design. So again, the assigned certifier needs to make sure that that's closed off on every particular project as such. So annexed documents, very useful reference document. What's designed, what's not designed. What's not designed has to be uploaded at the end. There was a little question earlier in relation to the design cert. What I like to do with the design cert, it's obviously signed by the design certifier when you're putting in your commencement notice. On some projects, you're going to have a degree of design done along the way. So at the end of the project at CCC stage, I will get a revised design cert off the design certifier dated at CCC stage to cover off the design that has happened in the interim. If I don't get the revised design cert, I will get an SD cert, or sorry, an AD or an ED cert. So it's just to cover off the design between commencement notice stage and CCC stage. The commencement drawings, we've mentioned this already, Richard has gone through it. That's our list from our data requirement form. So this is what we give to our client for the minimum requirements that we would have on the project. So you can see item number 1 there, as we've mentioned, the compliance report based on building regulations A to M. So I feel that's the best way, a standalone document showing how you're going to comply with each of the building regulations. Again, it's an extra amount of administration for the design certifier or the lead designers as such. So site location maps, floor plans, sections. Typically, when we're talking about systems, we're talking about agreement certs. So that's one of the first conversations we will always have at an early stage when we're asked to do Assigned Certifier. How are you building the building? Is it a traditional construction? Is it covered by regulations and standards? If not, have you got an agreement cert for that system? Is there something there that shows me how it complies with the building regulations? Because I have to show that in turn to the Building Control Authority. So just, I suppose, one thing that as assigned certifiers, when we put in a commencement notice, we always have to have our deep calculations to show compliance. You know, so fundamentally through all the drawings, we're showing compliance A to M if we haven't got the separate statement. So that's the standard documents. We've heard about them through the course of the day. Some of the things that comes up as part of putting in the number of commencement notices that we do, this has been discussed this morning as well, but the decision on which commencement notice do you need to submit, is it a 7-day, is it a short form or a long form? So typically it's long form with documents is what we're doing for new construction build. It's quite common for us to be asked to put in a commencement notice stage if you have a project with excavations or demolitions. So as John said earlier, no requirement for a commencement notice there. There's a lot of people that are under the belief that you need a commencement notice to show compliance with the planning. Again, John answered that question this morning. So if you have a demolition project, if you have an excavation of a basement or something like that, it's not building works, it doesn't need a commencement notice. But some clients and some funders that are risk averse want it documented that you're starting the project, and they may look for a commencement notice put in. So typically in those situations, we will say you can put in a short form yourself if you want, following discussions with the Building Control Authority. You know, as was indicated here earlier, it's just pick up the phone, talk to Building Control, see what they require in the particular local authority, and go with that as such. 7-day notices, you know the process there, you've no fire cert, you've made your submission. We're seeing a trend at the moment. We would have put in a lot of 7-day notices in the last 18 months. We're moving away from that. As I said, some of the larger apartment schemes that require 7-day notices are slipping back. A lot of funders, a lot of builders, a lot of building owners are risk averse. There's a risk associated with putting in a 7-day notice in virtue of the fact you might get your fire cert back and it might be different or more onerous than what you have constructed. So there's a difference opinion between the fire officer and your fire consultant. The other big risk that I would identify at the minute is that volume 1 is due to change, I believe, next year. So volume 1 is buildings other than dwellings in relation to part B. So you're going to have to be very mindful of what's coming in with that new version of the building regulations, and definitely need to be very careful if you're going to go down the 7-day notice route for that reason as such. So the BCMS system, again, I'm not going to say it's foolproof, but it gives you a good indicator or progress bar across the top. Fundamentally, we're looking for these green ticks here. You cannot move on to the next progression until you get your green tick, you know, so project particular. So that's putting in the information we get from our client. Again, we're going to check our planning dates and everything. Online assessment. So the guys from the National Building Control Office talked about that earlier. There's a huge amount of work as an assigned certifier in relation to that. Typically, most housing developments now could have 14 or 15 different house types. So that's 14 or 15 different online assessments. And again, Mairead mentioned this morning, the system is slow. So we lose a lot of time with online assessments. You know, it's kind of strange the way you've got a housing estate with 14 different house types, it's 14 different assessments, and then you could have an apartment block and that's one assessment as such, you know. So again, does it add up? in my mind, there's more risk associated with the apartment block, so why aren't we doing more diligence in relation to that on the online assessment? So your green ticks across the top, you're going to get everything going green, and then you can make your payment or your submission at the end. So one thing that happened, and again, it's important that you're making the submission, and it was mentioned here earlier, if you make the submission to the wrong local authority, that's it, thrown out, it's validated. You have to start again from scratch. So where this was an issue, for example, was there was a change of areas in Cork 2 or 3 years ago, was it now? Yeah, so there was areas that were in one local authority and the next morning they were in a different local authority. And that caused a little bit of confusion and problems, because typically what we do is we look at the plan and who issued the planning. Logic would suggest that that person is the local authority. The area has changed and we found out the hard way about it. So it's important that you make sure that you're making the submission to the correct building control authority. This is a big issue at the moment in relation to this 14-day notice. So this has been mentioned already. Very important, the building has to be started then by day 28. So you will have developers, clients, funders that are pushing and pushing and pushing to put in a commencement notice for all sorts of reasons outside of the building control amendment regulations. But I would always say, guys, you have to make sure to start construction work. As John said earlier, we have to pour foundations between day 14 and day 28. So that is important as well, that the project is started, there's boots on the ground, and that can start within the correct period as such. So typically what we're saying is, if we want to start in 14 days, from the return of the signed forms, we will allow 2 days. So the date on the form, fundamentally from the day we're submitting it or getting ready to submit it, will be 16 days out as such. And again, slightly different in relation to the 7-day notice. There's a lot of to-ing and fro-ing and interaction with signing of the forms and waiting for information to come back. And we have to allocate adequate time to make sure all that process is done as such. So our learnings, correct local authority, adequate time to allow the process to go through and the payment to be made as such. In relation to the planning information, as I said, on our request form, we asked the building owner to give us the planning reference number and the dates. We have to be very careful, and fundamentally we have to do a planning search now as the assigned certifier to check the dates and check the planning reference numbers, because it's quite common that the dates are different to what the local authority has on the planning file. So it should be the final grant date and not the conditional grant date as such. So again, has to be checked, have to do your due diligence on it as such. On some commencement notices, we could have multiple planning dates. So we could have a local authority one and we could have a board panola. If we put in the 2 reference numbers, it can appear, this is on the commencement notice, the 3-page form. So sometimes that can appear confused on the form. The numbers block up and they block each other out. So just be mindful of that if you're putting in the 2 reference numbers into the BCMS system. And again, the date has to be correct. And then the expiry date as well is to get your dates correct in relation to the 5 years and everything associated with that in relation to the planning. Locations of the project. This has been discussed earlier. So we have to put in an address. So it's amazing the addresses we get from clients on the submission of data form and how they differ. The local authority has a different opinion. So we had one case in the Greater Dublin area where a developer was calling his development a different address because that different address had a more prestige location. So that was something that comes up as well. So we have to do a check. We will check with the plan and what addresses, if there's a fire cert, is it the same address on the fire cert? And as the guys mentioned earlier, the idea of this approach of putting in the air code or the drop pin on the map is to make sure that the building control authority can find it when you go out to do the inspection. So again, it's all about checking and verifying the address. Another thing we would do as assigned certifier, when we get an instruction to proceed as assigned certifier, we will carry out a site investigation or a site assessment. So we'll call out to the site, is it where it should be? We will enter the site and we will look at the site in its natural form before any works have been carried out as well. Each house type should be included as a separate building. So as we said, we could have 14, 15 different house types. We have to run through the process and enter each one of those separately, very time consuming. And we spend a lot of time sitting looking at the little wheel going round when we're uploading the information to the BCMS. Each apartment can be uploaded as a separate building. Fire cert number is required for each one. So again, it's nearly easier to do an apartment block than it is to do an estate of houses with multiple house types as such. So we talked about the risk assessment earlier. I'm not going to get into that in a huge amount of detail as such, other than you have to pick your purpose group. And again, I'm sure the BCMS is going to have to be updated. I think there's a change in purpose groups coming in volume 1 at the moment. So again, you have to ensure that you've got the correct purpose group for your particular commencement notice, whatever type of housing it is, 1, 2A, 2B, depending on the height of it as such. So the purpose group is important to get that right. Where submissions include multiple houses, upload online supporting docs being extremely slow. So as we say, it takes a lot of time. Each house type should be included as a separate building. Apartments can be uploaded as a separate one as well. So the time it takes in relation to that, and you have your multiple house types there in your assessment as such. This was mentioned earlier in relation to the phasing as well. So total number of dwellings should be and needs to be consistent with the planning. Again, it's very important, check the planning. How many units have you got planning for? Obviously your commencement notice has to match that. The phasing can be difficult as well because it's something that's fluid as well. So again, we are reliant on the information that we're getting back from the client. If the client is telling us it's going to be 10 phases or whatever, fundamentally that's what we're going to put in the forms. What we're finding is 18 months ago, 2 years ago, we were putting in 1 commencement notice for 50 houses, for example. Now we could be putting in 10 commencement notices for 10 houses each, So again, the way the market has gone, it's a little bit of uncertainty as such. So we're putting in more commencement notices, which leaves this an important issue in relation to the phasing as well. This is a big one that has historically caused us a lot of issues when we're putting in our commencement notice. It's the 4 statutory parties have to be registered on the BCMS, and it's important the email address that they're using has to match the details. So for example, it's straightforward in relation to myself as the assigned certifier. My email address is the same, all my details are the same. But if you can imagine, if you have a builder or a developer and they have an email address and they set up a separate company for each new project, they'll have the same email address, and it's your email address that links you on the BCMS system, but then their company name is different as such. So what we will say to the clients and to builders is you need a project specific email address, that shows your separate entity for that particular project as such. So again, it's important that the 4 statutory parties set up that email address before we start the commencement notice process. And again, there's guidance on the National Building Control Office that we will send to these guys to get that set up correctly as such. The nominated roles then, so 4 statutory parties, you will get an email once we set up the folder and we put in your email address, you have to accept your role. So myself, as the assigned certifier and the design certifier, you have the builder and you have the owner as well. So everybody accepts the roles. There's a record there. There's nowhere to wriggle as such. Again, you're looking for your green tick before you can move on to the next section. The next section is uploading your statutory documents. So you download a blank document for the commencement notice. They have to be signed by each party. That has to be scanned and uploaded. So a lot of the difficulties we've had in the past is where people might sign a statutory form, but they don't bother dating it. So then again, we have to, part of our quality control, we have to check that it's dated as such. It's quite common we will send a commencement notice to a client for signing. They may sign page 1, it's a 3-page document. They may sign page 1 and take a photograph of it and send us back a PDF, not even a PDF of it, a photograph of 1 page alone. We'll have to go back to them and say, guys, sign it, scan it. We want a PDF with the 3 pages in the 1 document, because that's what we're uploading when we're putting the commencement notice back up on the system. We like to have a good file name on it. So we'll try and use the 7-digit reference and the description of the document, former commencement, and the 7-digit number specific to that project. So the documents will be downloaded, signed, and uploaded onto the system, and then we get our green tick, and we move on to our supporting documents. So we talked about the annex. The other guys looked at all those other documents as well. So supporting documents, so we know what's the minimum requirements. We have to show compliance with the building regulations. Depending on the complexity of the job, there could be quite a substantial amount of documents to be uploaded. You're putting it on your schedule of documents. And once you have your documents uploaded, you're on to the final section. And this is the only time you can do payment is if you've got the green tick across the top on the rest of the other requirements as well. So as has been stated, it's the 30 unit per unit or 30 euros in relation to an apartment as such. So then again, once that payment has been made, I get another notification from the BCMS, payment has been made. I send that off to my client. I tell them we have to have a decision. Is it 7 days? I think off the top of my head, we have to get a decision back in relation to valid or invalid in relation to the commencement notice. The important thing is that the client, the builder, does not start construction work until the commencement date, which is on the form, which is typically the 14 days. So one thing that we have been asked for in the recent, and again, there's discussions earlier, there was a question in relation to registered builders. We have building control authorities that have been asking for CRO numbers for builders. And I can only imagine this is to check that the signatory that's on the builder form, for example, is one of the registered directors of the firm as such. It's something that's come up recently. Again, if we get the new registration for the builders up and running, this will not be a requirement as such, because the Building Control Authority will just check the central register as such. Thank you, everybody. That's just, I suppose, the Assigned Certifiers assessment, or what we have seen over the last 10 years in relation to submitting commencement notices. Just want to thank the National Building Control Office and all the building control departments. We welcome discussion and interaction with building control. We love it when building control come out and carry out inspections on site, because we can use that to back up what we're talking to builders and clients in relation to as well. So as was said earlier, you know, I have no problem picking up the phone and talking to the Building Control Authority to clarify any of the issues that comes up with a commencement notice. So thank you, everybody, and I'll take questions later on. Thank you.